You just mentioned a mentor. So, did you have a mentor that taught you about spiritual disciplines or prayer? I know you said your mentor was sending you out to preach. Did you have somebody that you looked to who could encourage you in praying so that you could learn better how to pray?
Yes, I was impressed, David, both with I was converted in a small rural country Baptist church.
Okay.
In fact, all of my early religious life was connected with that kind of experience because I grew up in pretty severe poverty, and we lived way out in the rural area of Mississippi, and the only formal church services available to us were these little Baptist churches. And so the one, though, that impacted me was one that was very near uh, the home in which we settled when I was an early teenager.
Yep.
And Brother Grisham, Brother Grissom was a fifth grade educated Baptist preacher, but he was a powerful preacher.
Yep.
And he was unlike a lot of the preachers that I had been exposed to, because his spirit was, while it was persuasive and powerful, it was tender,
Okay.
and that drew me to him. And that was an influence because I saw him. I never talked with him about prayer, but I saw him as a person of prayer. But then I began to attend a youth meeting at the Methodist Church on Sunday evening, and we lived at that point in our life. We lived about 2 miles from town,
Okay.
and town was about 800 people. So I
So,
started
pretty small
walking in
place.
on Sunday afternoon, late Sunday afternoon, to attend this youth service, a youth meeting, really. But the young Methodist preacher was very active in it and took an interest in young people, and he took a personal interest in me, and he was really my first mentor as a clergy person. And it he was a transformative experience in my life, and talked to me about prayer.
Okay.
And
Now I know you were meant you were a follower, an avid follower of E. Stanley Jones, and you really were impacted by E. Stanley
yeah,
Jones'
yeah,
story.
there are two people that followed. David McKithen was my mentor as a young clergy.
Yep.
But in that Mississippi area, we had a person, a Methodist preacher, who was known really for his spirituality. His name was Tom Caruth. And in fact, Asbury Seminary, I think, was the first seminary that ever had a full time professor of prayer.
I did not know that. So Asbury
Yes.
was he
Well,
that one?
that was Tom Caruth.
Okay.
And
You know, that's unusual.
he happened to be serving a church at one time about 30 miles from where I grew up
Okay.
in Mississippi. And he and my mentor minister David McKithen were close friends. And because of David McKithen, I got to know Tom Caruth. And you'll like this. You'll really like this. Because of Tom Caruth, I got to know Stanley Jones.
There's the connection. Okay.
Yes, he was a close friend of Stanley Jones. In fact, one of the significant times in my life was that Stanley Jones, this was after I had gone to seminary and everything. Stanley Jones and Tom Caruth were doing a mission, teaching mission in Europe. And they invited me to go along to speak to young people.
Wow.
Um, and so anyway, those three clergy people, and add the fourth, Brother Grisham, the beginning mentor, but David McKithen, Tom Caruth, and Stanley Jones, and theologically, David, Stanley Jones was the one who shaped my theology, really. And when you really get down to it, the center of his theology uh, is the center of my theology, and the center really of my understanding of spirituality and prayer. That is the indwelling Christ.
Yes.
The that Christ in you, Christ in you, Christ in you,
The hope of
Christ
glory.
in you, the hope of glory.
So I've heard you quote that scripture all through our association together, starting in 2008 or 9. I would read it in your writings, and then when I met you, you would talk about how you would inhale and picture Christ inside of you, and exhale and picture whatever was bothering you or getting in the way, getting out of your body. And that whole text from Colossians chapter 1, the secret is this: Christ in me, the hope of glory,
Yeah,
really defines how you pray. I've watched you do this now for decades. You want to
yeah.
make sure
Well,
that when
and
you're praying in Him.
when I get in a reflective conversation like this, David, connecting all these experiences in my life, I can't leave out the fact that in the first congregation I served after my training in seminary, I was the organizing pastor of. I planted this church
Okay.
in Gulfport, Mississippi, and a widow lady. Uh, she was in her mid 70s then. Became a part of that church, and her name was Nettie Beeson. And Miss Nettie, you couldn't miss it. She was a praying person,
Yep.
and I recognized that. And knowing my need for prayer, I became attentive to Miss Nettie. And interestingly, and this is the reason I feel God all over all of this in terms of my journey. She was a person with some resources, and she had been able to attend conferences that she wanted to grow. And as a result of that, kind of became a follower of Stanley Jones.
Okay, so
And
there's a side door here to Stanley Jones as well, not just
yeah,
a direct influence.
wherever he would teach, it was near, she would go. Well, as a result of that, and her resources really, we began, even in that young, small Methodist church, we began to have basically prayer conferences,
Okay.
prayer teaching conferences. And
So
we're able, because of her, to have people like Stanley Jones come to our church, and Tom Caruth. And so I've been uh, so exceedingly blessed, David, with the people that have just been either in the heart of my life or on the edges of my life, that really have made me who I am, or have enabled the Lord to make me who I am. And Nettie Beeson was one of those persons as well.
so what you're putting your finger on is what every pastor needs. Every pastor needs to have a prayer warrior sitting in that church over there, where they
Absolutely.
can come alongside that prayer warrior and say, "Listen, let's pray
Absolutely.
for this congregation."
And
Yeah.
my hunch, my experience, so it's not a hunch, David. My experience is that in every congregation I've served, I have been able to identify rather quickly persons that were serious about a life of prayer.
Yes.
And I would urge pastors just to be sensitive to that, because they can be found, and they can be responsive, and and very, very helpful, very helpful
So
to a
actually, you're
pastor
kind of answering a
spiritually.
question that I wanted to ask you, because this happens to everybody, not just pastors and leaders. All of us have dry times, and all of us have flat times, or all of us have times where our spirit is wounded and we just don't have the wherewithal to pray or to seek the face of God on our own steam. One of my solutions is to find somebody that I know is a prayer partner, and then tell them I'm low, and have that person, male or female, young or old, doesn't matter, have that person intercede.